The rope presses painfully into your wrists, each tug a sharp reminder of your captivity. The air in this cell carries a pungent odor, not quite mold, but the unmistakable scent of decay. It's the smell of death. Your death. You're only 19 years old. In the last 2 years, you've achieved what seemed impossible. You've ascended to a position of power that even kings could never dream of. You've broken through siege lines that were thought unbreakable. Military strategists and English commanders alike have woken from nightmares, their minds haunted by your name. Yet, despite all your victories, they have you now. Your head is shaved, and the biting cold stings your scalp as if thousands of needles are piercing your skin. They've dragged you through every ounce of humiliation, reversing what you once stood for. The crown they forced upon you has now been stripped away, piece by piece. Your armor is gone. Your voice no longer carries weight. The guards around you no longer flinch at your words. Today, you signed a paper. The words blur together in your mind, but the meaning sticks. Renounce your saints. Those voices you heard. Demons. The visions that changed history. Hallucinations. The mission you believed God gave you. A delusion. And this dress? This degrading, suffocating dress? It's meant to turn you from a warrior back into nothing more than a thing. You thought you were saving yourself, but what you've done is sign away your fate, right into their trap. And the worst part, they made sure you'd walk right into it yourself. This is the story of how Joan of Arc was murdered through legal means. It's a story of how the most powerful legal system of the medieval world was turned against a 19-year-old girl who had no idea that the cage was already closing around her. It's not just a trial. It's the systematic dismantling of a human being using the law as a weapon. And what happened to her in 1431? It continues to happen today. If you care about history, about getting it right, stay with me, because this is a story that history tried to erase. Let's step back to 1429. You need to understand who Joan was before they broke her, because that's the only way to understand how they did it. France is dying. Not metaphorically. Literally dying. The 100 Years' War has dragged on for over a century. Think about that. 100 years of warfare, century after century of your nation bleeding out as the English take castle after castle, piece by piece. The south is under English control. The north is English. The coast is English. Your king sits idly in a palace in Bourges, uncrowned, watching his kingdom wither away like a corpse left under the sun. The war isn't just depleting resources, it's draining hope. Military commanders are convinced the English can never be defeated. The nobility is making deals with the enemy. Parents are telling their children that French victory is nothing but a fairy tale. This isn't a war anymore. It's an occupation masquerading as one. Then, in January 1429, a girl steps into the Dauphin's court. She's from Domremy, a place so obscure that most educated men in France wouldn't be able to find it on a map. She's illiterate, and she's never held a sword. Her name is Joan, and she claims to have been sent by God to save France. Most dismiss her as insane. But she's not insane, she's something far more dangerous. She's confident. She tells Charles exactly what he needs to hear. God hasn't abandoned France, the English will be driven out, and there's meaning behind all this suffering. Charles lets her ride with his armies. What follows breaks every rule of medieval warfare. Joan arrives at the Siege of Orleans, the most crucial stronghold still in English hands. For months, the English have defended it with fewer than 5,000 soldiers. These soldiers are seasoned, hardened by battle. The French have thrown everything they had at Orleans, but it's been like arrows bouncing off stone. Then Joan comes onto the scene, and everything changes. It's not that she fights differently. It's that the soldiers believe differently. When she rides toward the walls, they follow her, not because she's given tactical orders, but because there's something in her presence that says, "This will not fail." And somehow, miraculously, it doesn't. Orleans falls. The English commander is captured. The impossible has become possible. One victory, then another, then another. By May 1429, Joan stands beside Charles as he's crowned King of France at Reims. She's wearing armor, and the crowds are cheering. What was once a religious coronation has become something more. It's a vindication. A 19-year-old peasant girl has rewritten what is possible. She's proven to a nation that the English can be beaten. Joan has given France something it thought it had lost forever: hope. By the summer of 1429, she has become the most powerful figure in the country. Not officially. Officially, Charles is the king. But everyone knows the truth. The girl who hears voices from saints is the reason France hasn't already collapsed. The English realize this too, and they soon change their approach. They know they can't defeat her on the battlefield. She's already proven they can't. She's either divinely blessed or, if you're skeptical, just lucky in a way that defies explanation. Instead, they set their sights on destroying her in a courtroom. There's one place where Joan's divine mission doesn't apply: the legal and theological systems of the time. In May 1430, Joan is leading French troops at Compiègne, a small town near the border of French and Burgundian territories. The Burgundians, technically French nobles, have been allies of the English since the Treaty of Troyes. They play both sides, and everyone knows it. During a skirmish, a Burgundian soldier captures Joan. It's almost anticlimactic. One moment, she's rallying her troops on horseback. The next, she's dismounted, surrounded, and taken prisoner. This should have been the end. A prisoner of war, perhaps ransomed, traded, or eventually released. But it wasn't. The Burgundians sell her for 10,000 livres, the price of a saint. That's the value of the woman who changed the course of European warfare. To put it in perspective, 10,000 livres could sustain a family for 2 centuries. This is no ordinary ransom, it's a transaction. The English aren't just buying a girl, they're buying a symbol, one they need to destroy. Joan is no longer valuable as a military threat. She's valuable as a symbol of hope. She's proof that God favors France. She's living evidence that the English occupation can be defeated. If the English can prove she's a fraud, if they can convince people that her voices are demonic, her visions are delusions, and that she's a witch practicing dark magic, then they haven't simply killed a soldier. They've killed an idea. They've turned her own testimony against her, forcing her to recant everything she ever stood for. In January 1431, Joan is taken to Rouen, the English stronghold and military capital of occupied France. Her trial is supposed to be a religious investigation, an ecclesiastical court led by bishops and theologians. It's meant to be legitimate, but in reality, it's a show trial. Every aspect of it is manipulated. Joan is held in chains, not in a convent as church law dictates, but in a military fortress, guarded by 5 English soldiers 24/7. The courtroom is filled with pro-English judges. The prosecutor works directly with the English military command. Joan's supposed advocates are actually judges in disguise, and they're there to systematically destroy her. For 70 sessions, 70 separate hearings over months, they hammer away at her. The finest theologians in France versus a 19-year-old girl who cannot read or write. She has no lawyer, no advisor, no support. She's completely alone. But here's the twist, she's winning. Not officially, she's never going to convince these biased judges, but in a far more important way, she's winning. She's outsmarting the brightest minds in France. When they ask her if she knows she's in God's grace, a classic theological trap that no matter how you answer, you condemn yourself, she delivers a response that goes down in history. If I am not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God so keep me. When they ask if God hates the English, she answers, of the love or hate God may have for the English, I know nothing. But I do know that they will all be driven from France, except those who die here. It's not defiant. It's not reckless. It's perfect. She's quoting scripture to counter the theologians' arguments. She's parrying every trap they set. When they threaten her with torture and show her the instruments, devices like the rack and the strappado, designed to tear joints from the body while keeping the victim alive long enough to suffer. Joan looks at them and says, "Truly, if you were to tear my limbs from me and drive my soul from my body, I would not tell you anything more." Then comes the critical part. "And if I did say anything, I would later declare that you had forced me to say it." Joan is telling them that confessions extracted through torture are worthless. Joan understands the legal process better than they do. She knows that while they can break her body, her testimony will always be compromised. They hesitate. They can't break her through torture, so they change their strategy. If they can't break her faith or her spirit, they'll break her through fear and exhaustion. Their plan is simple. They're going to kill her. But not just yet. Not before she signs something first. On May 24th, 1431, you're dragged from your cell for what you don't know is the last time. Your body senses something has shifted in the way the guards handle you, a subtle finality in their grip. They lead you to the cemetery of Saint-Ouen, a public square already crowded with hundreds of people. No, thousands. Word has spread that today is the day Joan will burn. A scaffold is set up with 2 preachers. Bishop Pierre Cauchon, the man behind your trial and destruction, stands there. He is pro-English, ambitious, and has been vying for the position of Archbishop of Rouen for years. The English have made it clear that if he condemns you, that position will be his. And now, he's here to deliver a final sermon, branding you a heretic, a witch, a danger to Christendom. Before that, however, they offer you a choice. A notary steps forward with a document. He explains it, or rather, a shortened version is read aloud. You are to renounce your visions, confess that your voices were demonic, and agree to wear women's clothing, submitting yourself to the church. If you sign, your life will be spared. You'll be sent to prison instead of being burned alive. Nearby, you see the executioner standing next to the pile of dry wood, ready for the flames. You're terrified. Your body, weakened from months of imprisonment and interrogations, is fragile. You've been in chains, alone, interrogated for 70 long sessions. Your mind is nearly broken from exhaustion. And in that moment you sign. Later, witnesses at your rehabilitation trial, held 25 years after your death, testify that the document they saw you mark was short, a few desperate lines. They claim that the full confession that was later used in court was fabricated, expanded, revised, and made far more damning than the brief document you actually signed. They argue that in that moment, it was a sleight of hand, an ecclesiastical trick. You signed something simple and hurried, but what the court filed away was a far more incriminating confession. But in the end, it didn't matter. The trap wasn't in the text, it was in the act of signing. Afterward, they march you back to prison. The crowd murmurs as you pass. Some are relieved you weren't burned. Others are disappointed that the spectacle is over, though not in the way they expected. You're going to live condemned, but alive. Bishop Cauchon continues his sermon anyway, preaching from the scaffold, condemning you even after you've already surrendered. The performance continues, but it's a hollow victory for him. You're locked back in your cell, and here's where the truth turns colder than the stone walls surrounding you. Joan, you believe you've saved your life. You think the promise was real. That life in prison was the deal you struck. But your captors never intended to honor it. See, there's a rule in inquisitorial law, the medieval religious law. If you're tried for heresy and confess, you can be spared the death penalty. You get prison, yes, a life sentence, but still life. It's a form of mercy, technically. But there's another category with no mercy at all, relapsed heresy. If a heretic recants and then goes back to heresy, if they relapse, they are handed over to secular authorities for execution, no trial, no second chance. The relapse itself is the death sentence. The English and Bishop Cauchon needed you dead, but not just for heresy. They needed you dead as a relapsed heretic. If they executed you just for heresy, it would look like they had broken the deal. It would look like murder. The law would appear to be a lie. But if you relapsed, if you went back to heresy after signing the confession, then the blame would be entirely on you. It would appear that the law had worked perfectly. You had a chance at mercy and threw it away. So they engineered the perfect trap. They returned you to the same military fortress where you'd been held before. You were still in chains, still guarded by 5 English soldiers, 24/7. They shaved your head as a further humiliation. They made you wear the dress. This time, the dress you were promised would save your life, but which, in reality, made you vulnerable in ways they never intended. They put you back in the same situation, surrounded by the same guards, and with the same choice. Fall back into heresy, and you'll die for it. For months, Joan had worn men's clothing as armor, literally. She testified during her trial that she had tied her breeches and tunic with dozens of tight cords, binding them so securely that they could not be removed without destroying the fabric. This clothing was her protection from sexual assault. It shielded her in a room full of hostile men. Later, during her rehabilitation trial, witnesses confirmed that English lords had attempted to rape her while she was locked in her cell. The cords in her clothing had been the only thing preventing them. Now she was dressed in a gown, vulnerable, exposed, and surrounded by 5 male soldiers. The taunts began. The threats started. They promised that if she didn't comply, worse things would happen. 4 days passed in this torment, and then something happened that sealed her fate. One night, and here's where the testimony from her rehabilitation trial becomes absolutely crucial, the guards took her dress. They took it from her. She was left with only the men's clothing they had thrown at her in a sack. They gave her an impossible choice. Face the soldiers naked and defenseless, or put on the forbidden men's clothing. She chose safety. On May 28th, for days after her confession, for days into this arrangement, the judges came to her cell. Bishop Cauchon walked in first, followed by the other judges. They found her dressed in men's clothes. Joan explained to them exactly what had happened. She told them that the dress had been taken, that she couldn't defend herself in a dress among men, and that she had no choice but to wear what they had left her. But here's what mattered most. She also admitted something else. She told them that her voices had returned. Saints Michael and Gabriel had come back to her, calling her a traitor for having signed the abjuration. They had told her that she should never have renounced them. That was the moment. A different discovery was made at the Kana monastery, a site that Vlad himself had founded, much closer to where the supposed battle took place. In the 1950s, archaeologists discovered a headless corpse in a grave, a male skeleton dated to the right period. Could this be Vlad? It's possible. It would make sense. He died in battle, his head sent to Constantinople, and his body buried at Kamana, a place meaningful to him. But here's the thing, it's not certain. The skeleton was never definitively identified. The remains were never conclusively proven to be Vlad's. And that's strange, isn't it? If historians truly believed Vlad was buried there, wouldn't they have conducted DNA analysis? Wouldn't they have verified the bones, confirmed the legend? Instead, there's ambiguity. There's uncertainty. A headless corpse that might be Vlad, or it might not be. This raises a question. What if the body at Kamana isn't Vlad at all? What if it was placed there deliberately to serve as a cover story? What if the real Vlad, the true evidence of his death, remains hidden? The more we look at the physical evidence, the more the official story falls apart. So let's do something important here. Let's examine who had the power to bury the truth and what each of them stood to gain from the official narrative. For the Ottoman Sultan, the narrative was perfect. Vlad, the man who had psychologically broken him, the provincial prince who had humiliated him in front of his army, was finally dead. And more importantly, Mehmed killed him. The reality might have been more complicated. The death might have been Messier, or Vlad might have been killed by his own men or assassinated in a chaotic battle. But the simple story, Mehmed's victory over Vlad, served Ottoman interests perfectly. It made the empire look dominant. It showed that defiance was futile, that even a man as terrifying as Vlad Dracula couldn't escape the reach of the Ottoman military. This narrative needed to be protected. For the king of Hungary, Matthias, the calculus was different, but equally important. Matthias had imprisoned Vlad for 13 years. He'd held a Christian hero captive while claiming to fight the Ottomans. That was a PR disaster waiting to happen. When he finally released Vlad, sending him to reclaim his throne, Matthias was playing a dangerous political game. He was betting that Vlad would succeed, that he would become loyal to Hungarian interests. But instead, Vlad died almost immediately. If the truth was that Vlad died in a chaotic, poorly supported military operation, that Matthias essentially sent him to his death, it would have been a disaster. It would raise questions about Matthias's judgment and make him look like he had betrayed Vlad twice. Once by imprisoning him, and once by sending him to his death. But if the story was that Vlad died heroically fighting the Ottomans, defending Christendom, Matthias could position himself as the man who freed a great warrior to fight for the Christian cause. It was a redemption narrative, and it required that the truth stay buried. As for the nobles of Wallachia, the boyars, these were the families who had assassinated Vlad's father, who had killed his brother Radu, and who had grown comfortable with their power during Vlad's 13-year absence. They had every reason to want Vlad dead. They didn't want the terror returning. They didn't want their power stripped away again. They didn't want their families brutalized. If Vlad was assassinated by a conspiracy of boyars, if it was a targeted killing to prevent him from consolidating power, then those families would be guilty of regicide. They would be oath breakers, deserving of punishment. But if Vlad died in a glorious battle against the Ottomans, then the boyars weren't assassins. They were simply nobles in a kingdom facing external threats. The lie protected them from justice. And finally, the records we have come from all of these interested parties, the Ottomans, the Hungarians, the boyars, all of them had reasons to craft a particular narrative about Vlad's death. They wanted a story that would serve their own needs, and over time, that story became the truth. But the more we dig, the clearer it becomes that what we've been told is not the full picture. Vlad's death is shrouded in mystery, and the real truth, the one that threatens to undo the legends and the lies, has been buried for centuries. But as the pieces of the story fall into place, we begin to realize that the official narrative is just that, a narrative. A carefully crafted lie, shaped by those who needed it to be true. Ottoman histories, Hungarian records, and Wallachian accounts, most were written by people who weren't even there. No one was documenting the truth. Instead, they were documenting versions of the truth that served their interests. And because everyone benefited from the same lie, that Vlad died heroically in battle against the Ottoman forces, that became the story that survived. It's a conspiracy, but not in the usual sense. He saw the fire consume the peasant girl who had threatened an empire, and he apparently cried out in the marketplace, "We are lost, for we have burned a saint." Despite their best efforts to erase her legacy, they couldn't escape the truth. After her body had been completely charred, they raked back the coals to show the crowd her remains, proof that she was a woman, proof that she hadn't somehow magically escaped, proof that she was dead. Then they burned her corpse again. They kept burning it, over and over, until only ash remained. And then, to ensure there was nothing left, they gathered the remaining fragments and threw them into the River Seine. They wanted to make sure that not even her dust could become a relic, not even her bones could be venerated. They wanted her completely, utterly erased from history. But the English had overlooked one crucial thing that was already in motion. 25 years later, Joan's family demanded a retrial, and the Pope authorized it. In this rehabilitation trial, more than 100 witnesses were called to testify, including priests who had been present in the courtroom, judges who had voted to condemn her, guards who had been in her cell, notaries who had recorded documents, and soldiers who had stood watch over her. They testified under oath, in front of the Pope's representative. They testified to the truth. They testified that Joan's confession had been fabricated, that the document she had actually signed was not the same as what was filed in the court records. They testified that her imprisonment had violated church law, that the guards had been abusive, that her dress had been taken from her, leaving her with an impossible choice. They testified that the entire trial was corrupted from beginning to end. The rehabilitation trial declared the original verdict a complete fraud. Joan's name was cleared. The church officially recognized her virtue, and within a century, she was canonized as a saint. The English, in their effort to destroy her, had in fact burned a saint, and history ultimately proved it. But here's the chilling part. Joan didn't die because of weakness or spiritual failure. She didn't die because she renounced God or betrayed her mission. She died because she trusted the law. She died because she believed that there were rules in place that would protect her. She died because she signed a document thinking it would save her life. And that document was the trap. The system that killed her wasn't chaotic or incompetent. It was perfectly efficient. It had multiple fail-safes. Even when the theological assault failed, even when they couldn't break her through rhetoric, they had a backup plan. They had constructed a scenario in which her humanity, her need for safety, her fear, her desire to stay alive, would become evidence of heresy. They weaponized her own fear against her. It wasn't just about a confession. It was about creating the perfect circumstances where being human, needing protection, fearing rape, trying to survive, would serve as proof of her guilt. And this is where the story becomes more than a historical tragedy. It becomes something that resonates with modern times. Joan of Arc's fate wasn't just a product of medieval religious law. It's a reflection of a system that still exists in various forms today. We see this pattern everywhere. It's not always literal fire, not always scaffolds in town squares, but the architecture of control remains the same. Coerced confessions used against you. Legal traps where admitting the truth is itself evidence of guilt. Systems so designed that winning is impossible. Where defending yourself is seen as aggression. Where asking for basic protection is seen as evidence of criminality. Where transparency becomes incrimination. Joan of Arc didn't die because she was weak or wrong. She died because she was caught in a legal machine that was engineered specifically to destroy her, and she had no way to escape it. She signed the paper because she wanted to live, and that desire for life, something so basic and human, was turned into proof of her guilt. It's a haunting echo from 1431 that should terrify us today. You've just heard a truth that history tried to bury. The story of a girl who saved a kingdom and was destroyed by the very system that was supposed to protect truth. If you believe history matters, if you believe these stories deserve to be told accurately and completely, subscribe to Crimson Historians because the truth doesn't need to stay buried. Joan of Arc was declared a saint. Her judges, however, were not.